Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm happy to welcome this fabulous bunch of panelists on the screen who are now going to be called the A-Team, because it seems to be an annual event now that they're doing this catch-up for us. So I'm going to leave the introductions to each panelist, although I'm sure you probably already know them from past webinars and past industry events as well. So we're scheduled today for 45 minutes, which will fly by, I'm sure, but this does include time for a Q&A session. We're going to do topics as it goes along. So if you wish to ask your questions as we go along, then you can do. And if not, Kasia will moderate the Q&A session at the end otherwise. So please do get involved and use your Q&A button, please. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted onto the members only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, then please email info@ctameurope.com for more details. Our panelists have access to the registration list and may follow up with their own news separately. And I'll follow up in the next couple of days with information on our annual executive management program that we hold at INSEAD annually. So thank you for tuning in. I'm going to now hand you over to Kasia, and who will in turn hand you over to the panelists. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Karen. Hello and welcome. Kasia Jablonska, Head of VOD for BBC Studios Branded Services in EMEA markets. Today, however, I'm a moderator for CTAM annual webinar, where our guests, some of the best known industry experts and thought leaders, share their views on the trends which have shaped the media industry within the last year. Before we start, let them introduce themselves. Starting from looking at my screen, Maria.
Hello, Kasia, thank you everyone. My name is Maria Aguete and I'm Senior Director of Media and Entertainment at Omdia. Omdia belongs to the group Informa, as you can see here, and I'm now live from my beautiful office in London. So hello everyone.
Who are you handing over to?
To Jonathan Broughton at the EBU in Geneva.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'm Jonathan Broughton. I'm the Head of Strategy at the EBU in Geneva. Bonjour de Genève. If you don't know the EBU, we are the world's leading alliance of public service media services. In fact, we have more than 2,000 services represented among our 112 members and a combined audience of well over a billion people. I'll pass on to Guy.
Thank you, Jonathan. So hello, everyone. My name's Guy Bisson. I'm one of the founders of Ampere Analysis, and a very international panel today. I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles. I'm based out here for the time being, servicing our many clients out here and establishing a local team.
And my name is Nathalie Lethbridge. Hello, everybody. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here amongst such illustrious company. I am the founder and principal of Atonik Digital, which is a media advisory firm specializing in streamed entertainment and monetization of content. Kasia, over to you.
So let's start. Question number one, what would you say is the impact of the cost of living crisis on media consumption? Is it accelerating platform fatigue, or is it just the opposite? Effectively, that's what drove Sky growth in early 2000s, where people couldn't afford holidays and bought pay TV subscription instead. So Maria, what's your view?
Great question. So yes, in the UK, we face a huge crisis now. The cost of living crisis is quite bad. And we did a consumer survey with our partner Ipsos. And according to our results, the survey took place during April and May, we found out that although there are 20% more people churning to streaming video services, and 45% more services be churned this year, what people don't know is resubscription has increased to 84%. What does this mean? In time of crisis, people are resubscribing to services they have churned in the past. So they may cancel other forms of entertainment, going out, holidays, as you said, or other entertainment ways, but the results prove that people are paying more for streaming video services. And in the UK, who has increased subscriptions over the last 6 months? In the UK, Netflix is still doing very well, #1 service in the UK, grow 8% over the last 6 months. Amazon growth 5%, Now TV 18%, and Disney Plus 21%. So all these 4 services have seen a huge growth over the last 6 months, despite the UK crisis.
Yeah, I think it's not just a UK crisis. Certainly there's a cost of living crisis in many countries. Here, gas prices, as they call them out here, are going through the roof, nearly $7 a gallon here in Los Angeles for the premium fuel. What we've seen though from previous recessions, and I'm old enough to have lived through quite a few, I think I'd mirror what Maria was just saying. What people do not do is cancel their in-home entertainment and communication services. What they might do, however, is churn downwards, i.e. reduce spend. And I think the difference now is that in the past, we tended to have long-term contracts with providers, whereas now the market is led by streamers. The streaming market is incredibly crowded, and all of those are flexible 1-month contracts. So we will see a lot more movement up and down and between different services as people dive in and out, and the impetus will be there to move spend around. But I don't think it's an absolute disaster for the industry, even as we go into the inevitable recession that the world is heading towards, probably in Q3 or 4 this year.
And that's an excellent point, Guy, because what we're looking at is share of wallet, and that share of wallet is much more agile and flexible now that we have monthly subscription systems. So I think that's a real change in behavior that we're witnessing. So to your point, Maria, people are spending a certain share of wallet on their own entertainment, but they're spending it in a much more flexible way, depending on what originals released on which platform or what particular platform they want to watch.
And maybe what will come as a surprise as well is cinema, because according to Reuters numbers, and again, going back to the UK, although we have this data globally, Q2 is proving much stronger than Q1 2022. So Q2 will be a good month for cinema in the UK, although of course we're still below the numbers of 2019, but Q2 being stronger in cinema revenues box office in the UK compared to Q1 2022.
So again, if we talk about sort of share of total wallet, as Nathalie was saying, there's a fascinating psychological effect which is roughly encapsulated by the term the lipstick effect, which is effectively people in, we'll call it recessions. I'm not saying we're in a recession, but people in recessions do look after their spending. They'll look to see what luxuries and things they can do without. But the lipstick effect comes into play that when they've done all this hard work and they've conserved their sort of cash, the spend on certain luxury items actually increases. And this is why it's called the lipstick effect. It's somebody who's saved their money carefully, who's actually then going and splurging on a really expensive lipstick, because that's their luxury item that enables them to feel in control of their lives. And it's well documented, and it affects, you know, a range of things. It's not always lipstick. It can be, of course, cinema. So it's not too surprising that we will still see some spending on luxury items, including, you know, in the entertainment space, even if things get actually quite bad. Further to the sort of movement around services, I tried to coin the phrase stream hopping a few years ago, but it wasn't picked up on. But perhaps we'll see a resurgence of stream hopping during the sort of economic downturns we'll see globally.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Moving to the second question. Can you share your views on the advertising trends in US versus Europe? Is it one size fits all, or would you say that FAST is taking off in Europe the same way it has taken off in US, or do you think there will be other way of monetizing this content through advertising? And Maria?
Yes, to answer that question, let me see if I can show you one slide. So I think it will be better. If you can all see my slide, again, going back to Omdia consumer survey in partnership with Ipsos, we realized, we asked consumers, what do they watch? What is the most loved service that they consume on a monthly basis? You will see here in pink, the free services, in blue, the pay SVOD services. And look everywhere in the world how popular free services are. YouTube leads in every single country where we do our consumer survey. I put here 4 countries as an example. Netflix is the favorite streaming SVOD service everywhere as well here. And there are surprises in countries like the US to see TikTok, so top in the list. Social media is critical now, we should focus on that. Facebook as well. And then services, I would say fast, like Roku, that in the US fast, again, at the end of 2021, fast channels generated over $4 billion in revenue. I'm giving you a lot of data today. End of 2021, fast channels generated over $4 billion in revenues in the US. And we expect in Western Europe, it will be $1 billion by 2025. Also, you will see other things interesting, like going back to the UK. I think Jonathan will be happy to see, and the EBU, how the BBC is one of the most loved services in this country. So after YouTube, the favorite service in this country across age groups is the BBC, and Netflix comes after that. So well done to public service broadcasters. And another interesting thing we see, for example, in Brazil, Samsung TV Plus, going back to advertising and the role of consumer electronics and devices, how a company that was famous for doing devices or smart TVs now comes as top 10 in the favorite streaming video service in that particular country, where I spoke to Samsung TV Plus about it. They haven't even promoted yet. So without a big promotion, without even promoting this around the world, already comes in the top 10 in countries like Brazil. So looking at this, and look at another table I have with revenues, not here, but you will see why everyone wants to take a pie of the advertising revenues, why companies like Netflix as well are really interested in offering an ad tier as well.
And Maria, this is a really interesting slide, but I think one of the things that we see here when you look at Samsung TV Plus is that connected TVs, we will see those move up the ranks of the favorite places for people to view content. And they are building, as much as they can, a hub, an advertising hub across what will be fast and free. So my strong bet is that as they roll out their fast strategies and aggregate fast channels in the advertising ecosystems within that, we are going to see more growth of advertising funded services in Europe.
Nathalie.
I think the key thing is, and to come back to the US versus Europe question,
yep.
There's a very big difference between those markets, and certainly our own consumer survey shows that around a third of Americans are watching fast and AVOD services on a monthly basis. So in a given month, around 1 in 3 homes in the US engaging with ad-supported streaming services. In Europe, that is more like 4%. And why is that? And again, Jonathan will love this and his members, because in Europe, the public service broadcaster streaming services control that ad streaming market. So Maria's slide here shows BBC iPlayer, but if you go to any of the European markets, it's the public service broadcasters who control that free streaming viewing space. And that's the big difference between the continents and why the markets are developing at 2 very different rates and in 2 very different ways. And I think that's absolutely crucial to the positioning going forward.
If you don't include YouTube, of course.
Of course. So I'd just to follow on from that, I'm pleased to hear this data, Guy. That's fantastic. But sort of to follow on, I've been, considering this position for a little while. I think one of the key differences, again, if we do the US Europe comparison, is that In the US, fast channels have emerged at a time when there's an awful lot of people who are churned from pay TV. And they're effectively having to convince people who have already cancelled their paid subscriptions or have already moved to newer services or paid sort of smaller paid services, convincing their sort of churned users to watch advertising services. And again, if you compare that to Europe, that's not the case. We've seen a bit of a downturn in pay TV for sure. Maria will know this better than me. But pay TV by no means in Europe has fallen off a cliff in the way that it did in the States. So the kind of effectively the sales proposition that fast channels have to make in Europe is to persuade users of either paid services, which are still really significant compared to what they were 5 years ago, and of course the plethora of free options that are available. To sort of add a little bit of spice to the fast mix of the future, just because that's the model in the past, and if we're thinking about these kind of global fast services coming from the US, there is of course the alternative. There's the homegrown solutions, and of course even our members, some of which are of course funded through advertising, are interested in fast channels. ITV, just to mention one player, has been launching its own sort of versions of fast channels as part of its proposition. And again, Nathalie will be pleased because I think it agrees with some of her points. This is an effect as well of sort of connected and smart TV. So of course, if Samsung or Google is building a hub which supports these, it will be in part something that will see local engagement as well as this competitive sort of global commercial services, which are generally US based.
Can I just raise one more point, because I think it's really important, and being newly resident in the US, I've experienced it firsthand. And that's to do with the ad load on free streaming services in the US compared to, for example, network and cable television. So one example, Freevee, which of course is Amazon's service, in a typical hour-and-a-half movie, there might be 8 or 9 minutes of advertising. Compare that to more than 20 minutes per hour for a network TV or cable channel, and the experience is very, very compelling for the free audience over here. In Europe, it's not quite as extreme as that it's very pleasant on free streaming and very unpleasant on linear TV. And I think that's another reason why ad-supported streaming has really taken off in the US relative to Europe.
And I would like to...
Sorry, Maria, to stop you, because we actually have 2 questions regarding this, if I can read them to you. Right, so question number 1, on connected TV platforms, how do you see advertising developing? Will fast channel use their own advertising infrastructure to stitch the ads, or will they use the infrastructure of other platforms? And then the second question is, what is the pro-con of each approach? So who do you want to take the first question?
Maria, you're making a point.
I think it's just, yeah, go on, Nathalie.
No, Maria was making a point just quickly on that.
No, my point is, we did a panel recently about fast services, and we discussed that topic, how they share the revenues between, for example, Samsung and a provider like Rakuten TV, for example, and it depends who the streaming video service is, who's the device owning that relationship, and it can be both, because again, there are different types of advertising. The one that Samsung can put around the content, aggregating content from different streaming video services, around putting the apps of different streaming video services there, around promoted content, recommending content on the main screen. So the advertising world is super complicated. So who is using what? It depends on, again, in the streaming video service and the company, the consumer electronics device company aggregating that content.
And I think that is definitely one of the challenges ahead, and we're going to see a lot of development in the next 3 to 5 years in relation to that. Why? Because obviously for trading purposes, if you can get a common platform and common performance metrics, then you start to have much more powerful tools in order to drive up value of the advertising market. And there's always been there still is a bit of a delta between the digital ad dollar and the linear ad dollar. In order for that delta to sort of narrow, they're going to need to really invest a lot of money in building that infrastructure and really getting some agreement on a common ecosystem there.
Yes, and that relates again, Nathalie, to why the presence you have in a smart TV today is so important, and why Ofcom in the UK as well is trying to legislate around the position they give to public service broadcasters, for example. So the position you have in the smart TV today is critical because it's the place where people go to watch that content. So before it was in which channel can I see this content? Now is in which app, when I switch on my smart TV, can I find that content? That prominence in your TV is critical. And I think Jonathan as well, the EBU and public service broadcasters, they have a hard job at the moment how to compete against the streaming video world. And as I said in my previous slide, there are today more than 5,500 streaming video services. How can each of us in our own countries find the content from public service broadcasters?
So I think the AdFast and AVOD is the broad subject we can spend at least another hour discussing. Let's move to the next point, which is more focused on the content and the latest trends among the international content producers and aggregators. The way the content is at the moment being sort of produced locally, sold. Guy, would you share your views with us on the subject?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say it's a shame Jonathan's had to temporarily drop off because I'm sure he's got views on the first point I'm going to make. Obviously, there's a regulatory push in Europe to have streamers come into line with local players in terms of the volume and quantity of European sourced content that they have on platform. And certainly research we've just put out suggests that almost while no one was watching, because it's something we were sort of hot on monitoring a year or two ago, Netflix has hit 30% European content. Amazon has hit and exceeded 30% European content in most, if not all, of their European markets. And that surprisingly, some of the studio players who are nearer to the market are not that far off either. So I think what we've seen is regulation seed a competitive market for local content, which depending on where you sit is not necessarily a great thing. If your unique selling point as a regional or local player was that you had appealing local content, you're now facing a barrage of quality local content from the global players as well. Of course, again, I said it's depending where you sit. If you're a producer or a local producer, you are certainly still enjoying the content boom that this has created outside the US. And there's no sign of that easing. I know people refer to it as a bubble. They've been calling it a bubble for at least 5 years. Yes, Netflix has said they're going to be a bit more careful with what they spend. HBO is pulling out of European production for the time being for its originals, but I think the signs are still there that the market is buoyant and extremely lively.
Yeah, interesting, Guy, because again, we are also tracking titles and country of origin, and according to our latest research in partnership with our partner MediaVis in the US, proves that Netflix is still in some countries like France, Germany, and the UK, there is still falling short of the 30% quota. So there is still a work to do for many streamers in some countries around this 30%. So,
yeah, interesting. I mean, yes, you're right about certainly about the UK. I think France as well, our figures, but they're very close. I mean, we're talking 27, 28% in those markets. So they're not quite there, and not a big task to do to get there. And of course, those are the big wealthy markets for them.
Yeah, and even Disney Plus has started to roll out lots of local productions in Europe because they were heavily relying on US productions. But I think Jonathan is back. Jonathan, we're discussing about trends in production.
And in local
how
content,
beneficial it is for Europe and European players, which I'm sure you have a view on, Jonathan.
I do have a view on. Look, I think one of the massive, success stories of sort of internationalization of content is if we look a little bit at sort of local production companies that have managed to sell into the US, have been some of the most profitable entities in the media landscape, to be honest. And if you look at the cost of producing, say, drama in the UK versus the US, the average tariff is about 1.4 million. I'd have to check the latest numbers, but it's about 1.4 million in the UK, and it's sort of 2 to 3 times that in the States if you compare to sort of on a like-for-like basis. So although there's talk about pulling out of certain investments in Europe and concern over content quotas, certainly if you look at the value of European content versus US on a dollar-to-dollar basis for the time and the quality of the content you get, it sort of feels that if you are being careful with your cash, as Netflix said it should be, in fact, you should be looking to move out of the States. And certainly, there's places like Korea, which is called, they're now burgeoning content hub for Netflix specifically. But I do feel that if you are looking at the counting the pennies, pulling out of Europe as a place of production is not a good idea. It is way cheaper than US. But,
yeah, that's certainly true. What we're seeing though is inflationary pressure across the board. So it's kind of, Europe is getting more expensive because of the lack of not the lack of, but the fact that talent is tied up in deals and the lack of facilities. So invest in studio space, everyone.
So I agree with you on that. And there's a couple of points to consider here. One is, as obviously ROI is challenged because of the cost of talent, as we just said, one of the criteria I think we're going to see the streamers develop is the transportability of that content beyond the local market. And so that might narrow the field in terms of what is commissionable at an international level. And I think we're going to start to see that rigor overlay some of the content spend and some of the content trials that we've had in Europe. So people will be investing in Europe, but they may be tightening up the type of content they invest in from the US.
Nathalie, excellent point, because again, across Europe, I wanted to highlight again the importance outside English content of Spanish content.
Yes, that's a good example.
It's a good example because all the big streaming video services are making public the efforts they're making in producing more Spanish language content, not only to satisfy the demand from Spain, also, of course, Latin America, but the whole Hispanic population in the US that is huge and a huge, very important market. That's why HBO, as well as you saw, announced they're going to stop some of the programming originals they had across Europe, or exception to countries, they mention France and they mention Spain.
Exactly, Maria. They did that. So they narrowed their investment spend in the Nordics. They feel that Nordic noir travels well, but the other Nordic genres not necessarily. So that's point in that direction. And Jonathan, one of the challenges that your members have is that they're basically commissioning to a broad church of consumers. So they will have to compete against that very kind of targeted commissioning.
To bring another point that's relevant to Jonathan and his members, to the competitive so just to tie everything together on your portability point and the competitive dynamics, the other thing we're seeing is a significant growth in streamers for unscripted content, which has been a strong point of local broadcasters, of course. It's highly formattable, it's highly portable. And from almost no attention paid by the streamers a few years ago, it's now a significant part of their original production strategy, bringing them into ever closer competition with local broadcast players.
And factual as well, a lot of spend on factual as well, which is transportable.
It's interesting. You know, there's I guess it's a facet of the business model that a lot of the global players play with. There's almost a partial response consideration, something like that, from broadcasters, to actually sort of take a step back and refocus on, you know, what it is that we're doing in these markets. And one consideration is, in fact, the sort of difference between one way to describe it is me TV versus we TV, which is something one of the UK bodies mentions quite a lot. And this idea that if you occupy a sort of middle ground where you can produce content that works locally and globally, you're directly competing with some people with a lot of money. However, those sort of global broadcasters tend to avoid the ultra local content, you know, because it doesn't work with their sort of business model. So there is a sort of one area of thinking, which is, you know, broadcasters, you know, sort of single or small number of country broadcasters, if I include the Nordics, do have a sort of very defendable position on producing ultra local content that you know can be as narrowly targeted as a city or something like that is very relevant for those who have access to it, but not particularly relevant for, say, if you broadcast to an international base. So there's something to be said there for ultra local as a response to some of these inflationary pressures.
And Jonathan, based again on recent events I have been going to, a key question for producers and everyone is, will streamers now compete in quantity versus quality? What is more important, to have the highest number of titles, the biggest quality on those titles, quantity versus quality? What will be the average price of each production series right now? Are streamers under pressure to reduce what they spend per series? What do we see going forward? Because obviously, as I said in the beginning, people are churning a lot, so they're swapping services a lot. And again, Nathalie, I think this is one of your topics as well. But what is the role of pay TV operators creating bundles that will allow customers to swap between streaming video services? And the role of partnerships, telcos, pay TV operators, allowing that to happen?
You're absolutely right, Maria. I think the way that consumers are interacting with their choices of content, how content is going to be bundled, is quite important. Going back to a point that Guy made much earlier in the conversation, we had we have a different way of bundling content offers with broadband and with other services here, which has meant that operators themselves have benefited in Europe from that as a churn reduction exercise. People have a lot of services bundled into their pay TV subscription. But in terms of the point that you were making, I think one of the challenges for operators is the marketing of their content offers to audiences, because people are no longer choosing to view content from the EPG or from a traditional TV service. They are choosing their viewing choices on social media, and it's fairly impromptu, and they get led by that. So it's very important to have a marketing strategy and a communication strategy that engages the audiences where they choose and have that conversation about content.
Sorry, guys, to interrupt, because we have another question from the audience, and which actually ties with one of the other topics we have. The question is, will live sport become increasingly important to streamers? Which kind of ties in with the topic, sport as VOD platforms. Is the model sinking or swimming?
It's a very difficult, well, it's not difficult. I think a year ago I would have said, and this is outside of sports specialist streaming platforms, but for the generalist streaming platforms, I would have said sports, premium sports does not make sense. The model is not fit for global rights demands because of the value of local premium leagues like the Premier League and others. And buying that on a global footprint is very, very, very expensive, and money can be put elsewhere. I think my view is changing somewhat, and I think there are opportunities even for the generalist streamers, and we've seen it with Amazon in particular, to cherry pick certain sports rights. So I think that it's a very much a moving equation at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, is sports important? Live sports is still critical, key, king, whatever we want to call it. So it's important to have that content, yes. Also, before I go back to live sports, also all the content around sports right now is really popular. Docu-series, documentaries, the life of sports players, even the life of the wives of sports players. So sports content is really selling really well, not just live sports, anything around the sports. Streaming video services that they have been focused just on that, some of them are facing challenges. Again, because buying global rights of things like La Liga, Premier League, or others are difficult. And also you have the local competition in each country of local providers, like mainly the telcos between the UK or in Spain, Telefonica. And we all know what happened, for example, in the UK with the song losing that deal to Discovery and what that means for the company.
That's another really important point, though, and actually what our consumer surveys show is that sport is really, really important for 40% of the population, and not for the other 60%. And that 40% tends to be, and it does have a gender skew, and that gender skew is male. It also skews increasingly old. Whereas the content Maria was talking about, the companion content, Drive to Survive on Netflix, for example, broadens that audience because it brings in personality. Drive to Survive is about Formula One, but it's even more about the trials and tribulations of all of the drivers throughout the seasons that we see them go through. And I think that's a really important way of extending that audience on those generalist streaming platforms.
And also the partnerships that these streaming players manage to achieve in each country. So for example, I know 11 Sports did a great job in Portugal. So when you manage to get local deals in the country by country, that's critical as well. But I know the EBU is doing a lot around sports as well for the members, Jonathan, and probably people are not so familiar around that role of the EBU and the sports. Can you tell us more?
Thanks.
The sound is bad.
While he's doing his sound, I'll just add that all the sports personalities are also influencers, so they drive viewership as well, and that's important because they're significant influencers in the market for marketing purposes. Jonathan, over to you. Having fixed your sound problems.
I mean, I can jump in there. I mean, Ampere's worked with the EBU on a report on sport, and particularly looking at the free-to-air market, which I think is in resurgence to a degree when it comes to sport, having been knocked out by large pay TV providers in the past. Free-to-air TV is coming back as a provider of sport, and it has a number of benefits for the sports leagues in terms of the reach of that audience, especially at a time when they are challenged by a younger audience moving away from that particular genre. And that younger audience, of course, is increasingly on other platforms and has not been exposed to the premium sport channels on big pay TV providers. So free-to-air can re-enliven interest in sports that are otherwise losing their audience. And we saw that during lockdown with a bit of experimentation around some of the football and some of the cricket. And I think that's a key point.
Yeah, that's what for us is important at Omdia to cover all the sports, not just focus on football, because there are other local sports very important in the local markets that can generate a lot of growth for those players investing in that kind of content. And again, as a public service, is of interest to show every single type of content that it can attract an audience. And for example, now another hot topic is women in sports, how to promote. And I know, again, streaming video services are also investing in that, in women in sports. And I knew the EBU as well, Jonathan, but I don't know if your sound.
Yeah, it's my sound now. Can I?
The connection in Geneva is not very good, we have to say, Jonathan. Connectivity is another important thing for live sports. Without good
well, it's live sports
and live sports.
And Zoom calls, yes.
Right, we have 5 minutes left, and so with post-COVID industry coming back to life, and the huge amount of different events, suddenly interesting events, suddenly happening again. Can you pick one event you recently went to which you actually really enjoyed? What were the topics? What were your learnings there? Just quickly.
So who wants to go first?
I'd like to make a, I think
Guy first.
Is an interesting topic. And I wonder how much I think there are a few big events coming up, which will be a litmus test. Yes, there's been some great smaller events. Indeed, all of us were at one recently, NEM in Croatia, that was very well attended, very well attended. But I think the litmus test will be IBC and partially MIPCOM and some of those what used to be mega events. You know, there's a big resurgence of COVID in the UK. There's a big resurgence of COVID here in California. A number of companies that had gone back to the office are retreating back to home working. While hopefully it's not serious, I do wonder about the future of what I'd call the mega event. And I'm really interested to see what happens in the latter part of this year with some of those larger events.
I think one of the things I'd like to overlay on that is it's a time for reflection on what has changed and what hasn't changed. And sometimes when we go to these events, and you know, I reflect back on MIP TV, for instance, it feels like they're trying to continue with a similar model, but the world has changed. So I think one of the learnings across not just events, but also within organizations is to enable the positive change that has happened, whether it's through skills development, whether it's through how you converse, whether it's through hybrid mixes of formats for major informational-led events like MIPCOM and MIP TV, whether it's using online platforms as well as in-person meetings for distribution and sales deals. The world has changed, habits have changed, and we still need to see that play out in some of the industry events fully. I don't know whether the others would agree with me, but...
Yes, and going back to Kasia, which events we went, learnings, again, my highlights have been, of course, NEM Croatia, wonderful location, fantastic content, great friends like all of you in the panel, and Connecta Fiction in Toledo. And highlights, I have to say from NEM, I really like the topic about should telcos invest in content, yes or not? I like Maria Valenzuela saying a company like Telefonica, yes, it makes sense to invest in originals because it's a differentiator element, but I know many others disagree about that. So that's still an interesting topic. Should they aggregate or should they invest? And in Connecta Fiction in Spain, again, I was very surprised how streamers from all over the world are now soaking in investing in Spanish content. Because again, it's important for not only Latin America, Spain, for the US as well. So another highlight, investing in Spain, come to Spain to produce, in particularly Galicia, which is an amazing area for production. My next event will be IBC in September. And with this, I pass it to the next panelist.
Guy,
Guy, sorry.
I think I started and I think
I already, I think we've lost Jonathan, unfortunately.
We lost Jonathan.
I think we all had our say.
Yeah.
Oh no, Jonathan's back.
Jonathan is back.
Jonathan, what is your next event? IBC? Is IBC your next event? I think he has still issues with the sound, but I think I have the feeling that he will probably be there, and I have the feeling he enjoyed NEM quite a lot in Croatia based on the photos he put in social media.
Are you answering for me, Maria?
I saw your post in social media, so I guess you had a wonderful time there.
We literally have 1 minute for you to basically tell us about the recent event you went to recently and you really enjoyed.
the EBU's own General Assembly in Croatia was informative and productive in so many ways. I jest. The sort of commercial events definitely NEM is fantastic.
There we go.
Growing this
Big
popularity.
plug. No, the smaller events are really effective for really exchanging information and ideas. I think there was one event that you went to, Maria, in Lille as well, that you were very happy
Mania,
with.
fantastic. I really love it.
Cinemania. So this is the format that's really starting to become effective, where you can have real conversations, not just quick 15-minute meetings and you rush to the next one.
I agree.
Yeah. Right, we're running out of time, so thank you so much. As always, it's really interesting talking to you.
Thank you, Kasia, for moderating.
Yeah, thank you.
Highly enjoyable, as always. And for those in the audience interested to learn more, please email us at CTAM and enjoy the weather if you are in UK. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
everyone.
Thanks
Nice
for
to see you.
joining.
Thank you.
And thanks to the panelists. See you all soon. Next time, 2023. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.